they see the matter. Theologically, of course, they themselves have been unsure how to see the matter. Regarding the Tanakhic horrors, I did mean to say that if the God of Abraham is the God I see revealed in those texts, then we have a duty to reject him. But I don't think Plantinga would disagree with that. The differences lie, I trust, in our estimates of Yahweh's character, and I remain baffled by Christian apologetic strategies. I can't help but think that thoughtful Christians are torn between the urge to apologetics and the urge to shrink from the Bible horrors, certainly from translating their apparent lessons into daily action. But I can't speak for them. If there are Christians who wholeheartedly accept the horrors as models of righteousness, then I think that they are walking on the dark side. Plantinga adopts the reasonable posture that the dismaying passages in the Bible need to be interpreted against the backdrop of our knowledge of the divine love revealed in the incarnation and atonement. I will say more about this interpretive stance in my comments on Professor Seitz's paper. For the moment, I will have to let the following remarks about the story of the cross suffice. First, I don't think that the Passion actually happened. Indeed, I don't even think the Gospel writers meant to be asserting that it did. But reading the story the way Plantinga reads it does reveal a fundamental difference in moral emotions and intuitions. At the risk of oversimplification, one may say that Plantinga finds in the Passion narrative the most wondrous story imaginable, wondrous enough to furnish the makings of a theodicy, whereas I find its soteriology quite appalling. Ivan asks Alyosha whether he would accept a kingdom of heaven built upon the unrequited tears of one innocent child. Alyosha's answer is mine, even if the victim is adult and suffers voluntarily. I do not know how to build a bridge of understanding across this chasm in moral intuitions, but I remain committed to the attempt.
Okay, so for Q&A, if I can have you raise your question or raise your hand, and I'll write your name down, and then I'll nod to you so that you know I've acknowledged you, and then I'll call on you after that. So, Eleanor, let me have you go first. And I'm scanning this direction.
I appreciate Evan Fales' moral passion. I'm grateful for it. It's a pretty thing to have in the world. And I guess here's my comment and my question. Consider just the issue of the atonement. It seems to me that the theories of the atonement you've canvassed aren't remotely all the theories that there are. There is no Chalcedonian formula of the atonement. There are just different theories. And the two you've canvassed, one of them is rejected in the history of the Christian tradition as heretical, and the other one is a popular, very popular understanding. If you look at Anselm, if you look at Aquinas, you will find much different theories of the atonement. So I want just to point out to you that the theories that you've presented here are not the ones that the great minds in the history of tradition have accepted. Not that they accepted the same one. Anselm's and Aquinas' are very different. So that's my comment, and here's my question. If you were commenting on a paper of Harry Frankfurt's, and you wanted to show that Frankfurt had it dead wrong, you would look so carefully at his arguments. You'd look at what everybody else had said about those arguments. You'd really pay attention to the details of the literature. But in this case, on the basis of a very quick run-through, you're condemning an entire religion. I mean, doesn't that seem to you hasty?
Yes. Not just hasty, but very hasty. In the first place, obviously, I faced a dilemma here, which is that I did want to say something about this aspect of Christian soteriology and I had to say it very quickly. And so necessarily I didn't do it any justice. Although the views that I characterized are, you say one of them is heretical, certainly not sophisticated enough. I don't think that they ill reflect the conception that an awful lot of Christians have of vicarious atonement. Beyond that, I might say quite honestly that one of the most sophisticated theories of atonement, and one which I think has to be taken quite seriously, is Eleanor's view. And I would have loved to have the opportunity to talk about that in some detail. Maybe that can happen on another occasion. I don't think it succeeds either, but it sure does a better job of giving a plausible explanation.
Okay, in the back, there was a hand right there, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, it's interesting that you're treating, you're trying to indict God on grounds that we have commonly this idea of one human to another. I mean, acts of murder and rape, certainly we all find terribly unjust and cruel. But if we're trying to determine whether it's possible for God to be a morally standardizing being, in other words, a morally perfect being that we can take a standard of morality from, then of course there would have to be the assumption that if he was this character, he would have to be morally perfect. And wouldn't that somehow change what we could say about God's actions? Wouldn't his actions have to have a very different sort of reading and characteristic than merely looking at it as another human being? It's interesting that you said that if Dr. Plantinga was God, in which he may be closer than the rest of us, but if Dr. Plantinga was God, certainly he wouldn't do these things. Well, can we actually say that? Because we're all morally imperfect beings and we have a singular view of what it means to treat each other as other morally imperfect beings. But for God to be this morally perfect, possibly morally standardizing character, wouldn't we have to read his actions very differently, and wouldn't that provide more of a challenge for interpreting those actions?
Yeah, if I understood the question correctly, I want to respond, I guess, by saying two things. One is certainly to agree that human beings are morally fallible, and at least sometimes, surely, our moral intuitions are fallible. Not just fallible, but actually wrong. That I think we have to allow. It's harder to allow that our moral intuitions are wrong when it comes to matters like genocide and rape and some of these other things. If you seriously are prepared to accept that possibility, then it's very hard for me to see how you avoid a kind of rather radical moral skepticism. The other point that I would want to make is, and it's a connected point, of course, is to just remind you of Locke's argument, which seems to me to be right. That is to say, ultimately, I don't know what we would have to go on if revelation itself is in question. Revelation with respect to morally relevant matters, other than our moral intuitions and our moral reasoning.
Steffi.
Thank you. This is a question for a lot of people. The closest approximation to it is Professor Plantinga in this room. This is the discussion that just as when we say of a sporting team, they murdered us. They tore us into little bits and jumped up and down on them until they got blisters. We know how to parse that. We know how to read that in a sporting event in which it is not alleged that any human being was permanently harmed. And you suggested that such a line can be run about the orders to commit mass murder burn the temples and so on, including this example from Numbers that we've been discussing. But it seems to me that that argument is yet incomplete. We know how to explain, based upon our common acculturation, how to explain these in ordinary 21st century American English, but how are we going to make that argument here as opposed to just state, perfectly plausibly, that such an argument could be made?